She said they were going to come. She said I would have a family. Sister Margaret sat on the bed beside him, held him tight. She was right. Lucas whispered these words through trembling lips as dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows of Sacred Heart Church. The small boy sat curled before the altar, his thin arms wrapped around his knees, eyes fixed on the statue of the Virgin Mary above him. Sister Margaret knelt beside the child, her heart racing with the fear of the past 12 hours. Lucas had vanished from St. Joseph Group Home during evening prayers, sending every caretaker into panic. Police had searched the streets. Volunteers had combed parks and alleys. And here he was, 6 blocks away in this abandoned church that most people had forgotten existed. The building had stood empty for 3 years, its congregation dissolved, its doors locked against the weather and vandals. Yet somehow this 4-year-old had found his way inside. Lucas had arrived at St. Joseph Group Home 3 years earlier, a tiny 1-year-old who could barely walk. His parents, Daniel and Marie Chun, had been driving home from a late dinner when a drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 87. The impact killed him instantly. Lucas survived only because his car seat absorbed the collision. He had no other family, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles willing to take him in. The state placed him with Sister Margaret, who ran the group home with a staff of 4 caregivers. She remembered the day he arrived, so small, so quiet, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had been in the car with him. The rabbit was all he had left of his parents. For 3 years, Lucas lived among 15 other children, all waiting for families. He watched as babies were adopted quickly, as toddlers found homes within months. But Lucas remained. Perhaps it was his age, no longer an infant, but not yet old enough for school. Perhaps it was the sadness in his eyes that never quite faded. Life at St. Joseph Group Home followed strict routines. Wake at 7, breakfast at 7:30, lessons and play until lunch, quiet time in the afternoon, dinner at 6, prayers at 8, lights out at 9. Sister Margaret believed structure gave children stability when everything else in their lives had collapsed. Lucas followed the routines without complaint. He shared a room with 3 other boys, Tommy age 6, Marcus age 5, and little Jaden who was 3. They became his brothers in a way, but the bond was always temporary. Everyone knew that one day someone would leave. The living room wall displayed photographs of children who had found families, smiling faces standing with their new parents. Lucas studied those pictures every day, memorizing the joy in their expressions, wondering when his own photograph would join them. Sister Margaret did her best to make each child feel special. She read bedtime stories, bandaged scraped knees, celebrated birthdays with homemade cake. But Lucas noticed how her eyes grew sad when families visited and passed him by, choosing younger children instead. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. A young couple arrived to meet Jaden, the 3-year-old who slept in the bunk below Lucas. They spent 2 hours playing with him in the activity room, laughing at his jokes, reading him stories. Lucas watched from the doorway, his stuffed rabbit clutched tight against his chest. When the couple left, they promised to return with adoption papers. Jaden bounced with excitement, telling everyone about his new mommy and daddy. That night, Lucas could not sleep. He lay in his bunk listening to Jaden's soft breathing, knowing his little roommate would soon be gone. It was the 5th time Lucas had watched a child leave. 5 times he had said goodbye. 5 times he had wondered why no one wanted him. Sister Margaret found him crying in the bathroom at midnight. She held him close, whispered that his family was out there somewhere, that God had a plan. But Lucas shook his head. He remembered his mother's voice from long ago, remembered her praying to the Virgin Mary every night before bed. Lucas made his decision during evening prayers 3 nights later. Sister Margaret led the children in their nightly devotions, hands folded, heads bowed. Lucas whispered his own prayer instead, asking the Virgin Mary to help him, to show him the way to a family. When prayers ended and the children filed upstairs to bed, Lucas slipped away. He had noticed Sister Margaret always checked on the younger children first, giving him a 10-minute window. He grabbed his stuffed rabbit, pulled on his jacket, and crept down the back staircase that led to the kitchen. The rear door was locked, but Lucas had watched the caregivers use it dozens of times. He dragged a chair to the counter, climbed up, and turned the deadbolt. Cool night air rushed in as he stepped outside. The streets were dark and empty. Lucas had never been outside alone at night, but fear could not stop him now. He walked along Riverside Avenue, past closed shops and silent houses, following a route he had memorized from car rides. 6 blocks to Sacred Heart Church. Sacred Heart Church loomed before him, dark and imposing against the night sky. The main doors were chained shut, but Lucas found a side entrance where vandals had broken the lock months before. He pushed through, stepping into darkness that smelled of dust and old wood. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colored patterns across empty pews. Lucas walked slowly down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The altar stood at the far end, draped in white cloth that had yellowed with age. Above it, bathed in pale blue moonlight, stood a marble statue of the Virgin Mary. Her arms were outstretched, her face gentle and kind. Lucas approached until he stood directly before her. He placed his stuffed rabbit on the altar steps, then knelt as he had seen Sister Margaret do during prayers. "Mama used to pray to you," he whispered. "She said you always listened. She said you cared about little children." His voice cracked. "I need a family. Please. I'm so lonely." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he pressed his palms together. What happened next, Lucas would remember for the rest of his life. The air around him grew warm despite the cold September night. The moonlight seemed to brighten, focusing on the statue above. And then he heard a voice, soft and clear as crystal. "Do not be afraid, little one." Lucas looked up, tears still wet on his face. The statue remained stone, unchanged, but the voice continued. "You are loved. You have always been loved. A family is coming for you. Trust and wait." The warmth wrapped around him like an embrace, filling the emptiness inside his chest with something he had never felt before. Hope, pure and certain. He did not know how long he knelt there. Time seemed to stop in that sacred space. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him. Lucas curled up on the altar steps, his rabbit clutched close, and fell into the deepest sleep he had known since his parents died. Morning came with voices. The Church Restoration Committee had arrived for their weekly assessment. Father Miguel, the retired priest overseeing the project, pushed open the side door and froze. A child lay sleeping before the altar. Father Miguel immediately called the police while committee member Elena Vasquez stayed with Lucas. The boy woke slowly, disoriented at first, then remembered where he was and why. Sister Margaret arrived within 20 minutes, her face pale with relief and fear. She swept Lucas in her arms, checking him for injuries, asking if he was hurt. He shook his head, calm in a way that surprised her. "She came to me," he said quietly. "The Virgin Mary. She said a family is coming. She said I just have to wait." Sister Margaret exchanged glances with Father Miguel. The old priest had seen many things in 40 years of ministry, but something about the child's certainty gave him pause. "Lucas," Father Miguel knelt down. "What exactly did you see?" "I did not see her move," Lucas explained, "but I heard her voice. She said I am loved. She said they are coming for me." The committee members whispered among themselves. Some dismissed it as a dream, a lonely child's imagination. Others were not so sure. Elena pointed to the altar where Lucas had slept. "Look at his face. That is not the expression of someone who imagined comfort." News of the incident spread through the community within hours. Elena's daughter worked at the local television station and mentioned it to her assignment editor. By afternoon, a news crew stood outside Sacred Heart Church. For year-old claims Virgin Mary spoke to him in abandoned church, the anchor reported. The story divided the town. Father Miguel gave a careful statement, neither confirming nor denying the supernatural elements, but acknowledging that something profound had affected the child. Sister Margaret refused interviews, focused only on protecting Lucas from the sudden attention. But she could not stop what happened next. People began visiting Sacred Heart Church. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds. They came seeking comfort, seeking miracles, seeking proof that God still listened. The church that had stood forgotten for 3 years suddenly filled with prayer candles, flowers, and handwritten petitions. The diocese sent investigators. They interviewed Lucas 3 times, each session recorded and analyzed. Psychologists evaluated him, searching for signs of trauma or delusion. Medical doctors examined him. And through it all, Lucas remained steady. She spoke to me, he insisted. She promised. Among the visitors who came to Sacred Heart Church were Michael and Rebecca Torres. They had been married for 9 years, struggling with infertility for 7 of them. 3 rounds of treatment had failed. Adoption agencies had wait lists stretching years into the future. They had nearly given up hope when Rebecca saw the news story about Lucas. Something in the boy's eyes called to her. Michael felt it too, though neither could explain why. They visited the church on a rainy Thursday morning, lighting candles and praying for guidance. Afterward, they drove to St. Joseph Group Home and asked to meet Lucas. Sister Margaret brought him to the visiting room, where he sat quietly with his stuffed rabbit. Rebecca knelt to his level. "Hello, Lucas. My name is Rebecca. This is Michael." Lucas studied them with those solemn dark eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "Are you here because of what I said? About the Virgin Mary?" Michael nodded. "We are. But we are also here because we have been praying for a child for a very long time. And when we saw you, something told us you might be the answer to our prayers, just as we might be the answer to yours." The adoption process moved faster than anyone expected. Background checks cleared within 2 weeks. Home visits revealed a warm house on Maple Street with a bedroom already painted soft yellow, waiting for a child who had seemed impossible to find. A judge reviewed the case and saw what everyone else saw: 2 people desperate to love and 1 child desperate to be loved. On a crisp October morning, Lucas became Lucas Torres. The children at St. Joseph gathered in the common room to say goodbye. Tommy hugged him tight. Marcus gave him a toy car. Little Jaden, still waiting for his own adoption to finalize, cried and made Lucas promise to visit. Sister Margaret held him longest of all. "You were right to trust," she whispered. The Virgin Mary kept her promise. Lucas nodded against her shoulder. "Will you come see me?" "Every month," she promised. "You will always be one of my children." Michael and Rebecca led him to their blue sedan parked outside. Lucas carried his stuffed rabbit and a small bag of clothes. As they drove away, he turned to watch St. Joseph fade from view, waving until it disappeared completely. The Torres house was 6 blocks from Sacred Heart Church. In the months that followed, Lucas went there every Sunday after breakfast. He always brought fresh roses from Rebecca's garden. He placed them at the base of the Virgin Mary statue, stayed in silence for several minutes, then left. The church continued welcoming visitors. Not the crowds from those first intense weeks, but a steady flow of faithful seeking comfort, especially during difficult seasons, when illness struck, when marriages crumbled, when grief felt too heavy to carry alone. Lucas grew into a gentle boy. He excelled in school, earning praise from teachers. He made close friends in the neighborhood, played soccer on weekends, laughed more than he had ever laughed before. Michael and Rebecca loved him with the fierce devotion of parents who knew how precious their gift truly was. He never spoke publicly about that September night in the church. When classmates asked about the news stories, he smiled and changed the subject. The apparition of the Virgin Mary at Sacred Heart became local legend. Some believed completely. Others remained skeptical. Most existed somewhere between, wanting to believe but uncertain. But everyone agreed on one truth. Something happened in that church. Something that changed lives. Something that brought hope to a community that needed it desperately. Coincidence, perhaps? And you, do you believe in the miracles of the Virgin Mary? Write in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that strengthen faith. Because sometimes in the deepest pain, in the moment of greatest despair, something extraordinary happens. Something that reminds us we are never truly alone.